I want that same energy out here, okay? Oh, my goodness. Uh, Here's a non sequitur. I was having a really hard year a few years ago. 2022, fall of 2022 was rough. And I'll tell you why. I'll take you back to that time. We were, as you know, the pandemic was sort of hopefully kind of dwindling at that point, at least in terms of its greatest intensity. But in United Methodist world, we were at a breaking point. And that was when a number of churches had votes and conversations, and they voted about whether they would leave the denomination or whether they would stay in it. And it was a full-blown schism in the UMC. And it was rough. Now, I did not go through the hell that some of my colleagues, as other clergy in the UMC did, where they watched their congregations tear each other apart. And they had a vote to leave the denomination or stay in the denomination within less than 10 votes. And so it was a 50-50 split, and it just wreaked havoc on the congregations. I'm thankful that that wasn't our story at Grace. But we had families leave, and we had pain associated with that, and there was some hard conversations that happened during that time, and it was awful. I mean, it was just really, really hard, and we were wondering what the future would be like. And I went to a special conference, a special called annual conference of the North Alabama Conference, and we had a vote down at the BJCC where we watched all of these sister churches and colleagues walk out the door after we had had a final worship service together. I mean, it was the hardest season of ministry that I have encountered to date, and I hope I never experience anything like that again. And I remember, even though it was very public and it was very much a known thing that was going on, I remember just feeling at times partly alone going through that. I felt isolated in that moment, and I reached out to a colleague who I had heard was struggling mightily because of, again, many, many, many painful conversations, people screaming at him, hate mail, that kind of thing. And we went out to lunch, and as we were wrapping up our lunch together, he said, "It's good just to be together. I got to go back to the office and continue to face this, but it's been nice to have this reprieve and this time together to have this conversation." And I said, "It has been. We should do this again, and maybe we should include a few other people. Who would you want to be on our list?" And so we began to come up with a list, not because it was an exclusive group or anything, but just because it was a group of our friends. It was a group of people that when we invited them to come to a lunch or a breakfast once a month, we knew that they were likely to say yes. And the only thing that had to be the case was they had to be the senior pastor or the solo pastor at a church. Not because that was the exclusive club, but because those would be the people that would understand what it was like to be in our shoes. And so we began to add some names to an email list and invited people. And the first time that we gathered for breakfast, we had to add tables and add chairs because more and more people kept coming up than you'd normally expect. And then month after month we did this, and it carried on for 2 years. And now we continue to get together, but it's about once a quarter. And it's because of that idea of the power of coming together when you just understand each other, when further explanation isn't necessary, and even though we can't fix each other's problems, it's good to go through this life with others around us. I occasionally preach sermons or sermon series on topics where I feel like I have some sort of, well, I would call it an act of the Holy Spirit, sort of nudging me along. Or you may call that holy serendipity, or maybe a sacred echo, or whatever name that you prefer for that just that sense that something comes over you that maybe this is the direction I should go, or maybe this is the decision I should make, or this is the thing I should say yes or no to. You know what I mean? And I had been wondering about a particular topic for a while now. And as I committed to preaching this sermon this week, it was just continued to be validated by different things. I opened up an email and saw in an article called, I think it was called Man Tending. It's different probably than what you're thinking it is, but you can Google that. And then there was something about the challenge of so many men to have relationships with other men. And then there were articles that I was receiving about loneliness that would just come across on a news release as I was scanning through the newspaper or online articles. And then there were podcasts that just sort of seemed to catch my eye. And all of a sudden, it was that this topic around loneliness. Now, again, we're talking about different than the act of being alone. Being alone is something that I think we all cherish from time to time. We like those times. We all need those times. I love alone time when it's voluntary alone time. But loneliness is different. Loneliness is the idea that you are yearning for other connection, but you aren't receiving that, or that is not being accomplished in your life. And loneliness is something that I don't think it was by chance. I do think it was Spirit-led, but I also think that this is just a topic that's on a lot of our minds right now, because this is something that people are struggling with. And if you look at the rates of those who are reporting that they are feeling increased isolation or loneliness, those numbers continue to tick upward with each passing year. I don't know how many of you knew this when it happened at the time, but 2 years ago, the United States Surgeon General came out with a report. It was like 40 pages long. And that report said that in the United States, we are suffering now from a full-blown epidemic of loneliness. An epidemic of loneliness. Now, before I even read his report, I had made some assumptions. I made an assumption that, that's COVID related. We all went inside and, isolation and quarantining and, only being around a few family members or chosen friends and blah, 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 blah. Yes, but the truth of the matter is that the research says that well before COVID, we saw this trend starting. And what COVID did with loneliness and isolation is the same thing that COVID did with a lot of things, which is just speed up the process that was already set in motion before the pandemic began. And this has become such a problem that we see other physiological effects from loneliness. We see things that you would expect, like anxiety and depression having an uptick, but there's other things too, like increased rate of heart disease or dementia. And there's a whole host of other things that come along with it. And the Surgeon General's warning came up with this sort of pretty powerful statement. Dealing with repeat loneliness and isolation takes the same physical toll on your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's pretty telling, isn't it? So the question is if the church is deep thinking and talking about issues of our time and wanting to wrestle with the real stuff that is a part of people's lives, and that includes venturing into topics that are not fun necessarily to talk about or to hear about, but they are things that people suffer with privately, in the quiet of their own life, that they don't want to admit to. And even if loneliness and isolation isn't something that you are presently dealing with or have had a concern about in the past, you know somebody, statistically you know somebody that is struggling with this, or it may be something that will come to pass at some point in your life. And so I think it's the responsibility of the church to address things like this when they come up. And certainly if it's reached the point of epidemic status, maybe it's time to consider, what does God say and what is the church's role in fighting against loneliness and isolation? One of the things that I had come across in doing some research for this was the work of a psychologist named Dr. Ehler. And Dr. Ehler has a very popular podcast where he talks about different psychological issues and concerns. And he talks about this topic, and he talks about things a little bit differently. It's not just about scientific research, but it's about things that he has observed in his counseling practice, which I think is really useful. Because he's, boots on the ground kind of person. He's seeing what's going on in people's lives and in the world around him, and he has responded in a particular way. And so here are some things that he noticed that he said are trends to be aware of that are concerning. These are sort of warning things. The first thing he said is that a lot of Americans have gotten caught up in this idea of what he calls para-relationships. Now, you're going to think this is absurd, many of you, when you hear it, but it's a real thing. A para-relationship, as defined by Dr. Ehlers, is the kind of relationship that people will develop with a person that they encounter in media. So, that could be one feels like they develop a connection to, a relationship with somebody who's a celebrity, for instance. As celebrities are, more and more information is out there about them. Used to be just, ridiculous sort of tabloid stuff, but now they have Twitter accounts or they're posting things on the internet all the time, and you're able to follow step by step through their life. You want to know what they're having for dinner and know what they're wearing to work. I mean, that kind of involvement gives you a glimpse into somebody's life, and some people have said that feels like a relationship for me, but it's not a real relationship. And if that sounds sort of outrageous to you, then there are other people who are, living these sort of reality lives where their whole life is captured, or they're an online influencer, or even I think about the connections that people develop with like a news anchor or a morning television talk show personality, right? I mean, the number of people that, for example, felt like they were friends with Katie Couric is real. Right? And so the more that those kinds of things are accessible, the more that people invest in those kinds of relationships, they feel like that is a real thing with them. The second thing that he talked about, Dr. Ehlers talked about, he said, was that we now have sort of a disassociation or detachment from a lot of our commerce. And what he means by that is that, like not too long ago, you'd have to go out to buy food. You'd have to go somewhere to purchase clothes. You'd have to interact with a dressing room attendant or a cashier or somebody working at the supermarket, right? You'd have to interact with a server or a hostess at the restaurant. And those things are not necessarily the case anymore. And more people working remotely or working in a hybrid kind of option, that's fewer and fewer office interactions. Maybe their boss is someone that they haven't even met because they work in another city, but they interact with them over the computer. You get the idea, right? But this detachment from some of the things that helped make our commerce, our economy run, and we're a part of day-to-day life. And now when you can DoorDash your meals, you can order your groceries delivered to your door. You can order pants and light bulbs online, and they come. You don't have to interact with people. And if you work from home, that's even a higher risk kind of thing, right? And we think about it as convenience, but he's saying there's a drawback to this. The other thing, there was several on the list, but the other one that I thought was noteworthy, particularly to talk about today, was sort of pulling back in terms of social organizations. That's clubs, fraternal organizations, volunteer opportunities, and of course, the church. You know the number of Americans who claimed to be affiliated with a worshiping group that's across any religion in America decreased in the past 20 years from 70% to 48%. That's a pretty startling statistic, I think, too. And so for whatever reason, people are withdrawing from that. And I think that you could say, well, yes, there's things like schisms, and there's things like people have been disappointed or lost trust in institutional things. Maybe, yes, I think there's some of that. That's just fair and honest, but it can't tell the whole story either. And so all of these problems, they add up. And they're things that the doctors among us, psychologists, therapists, they're seeing these concerns, and they want to address them. The scripture that I read earlier from Genesis 2, part of the creation story. And as Amanda said so well, she already said what I was going to say. I mean, it's notable that in Genesis 1, God says, He speaks all of these things into creation. There was the earth, and it was good, and there were plants, and it was good, and there were food, and it was good, and there was light, and it was good, and there was living things walking on the earth, and it was good, and then there was humanity, and the human being was good, except that what was not good is that the human was alone. And I don't think that this is about coupling. At least that's not what I'm emphasizing right now. Coupling's fine. But it's about that we are not meant to do this alone. And the more and more that we have opportunities through technology or through outside influences and voices telling us that self-sufficiency and going it alone and not asking for help and being totally self-sufficient and capable of caring for our every need is the goal, it's contrary to what people in the Judeo-Christian worldview have been promoting for thousands of years. How telling is it that in Genesis 2, the creation story, part of that story is that we are not meant to do this on our own. Isolation and loneliness is not a part of God's will for humanity. We do it together. The hard part, of course, is not naming the problem. The hard part is fixing the problem. And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about loneliness and isolation in the same kind of way for the next few weeks, but we're going to be continuing to sort of refer back to this and addressing that issue. But I want to name a couple of things that I think were powerful things for that, again, that Dr. Ehlers pointed out. He says, number one, all of those relationship and connection tools that we have access to in terms of media, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Snapchats, the whatever, all of those should be something that are there not as a replacement for relationships, but they're as an opportunity to enhance them. So they don't take the place of them. You don't make online friends on Facebook that you've never met before, but you have friends and you keep up with them. I like being reminded of when birthdays are, right? But that's not a substitute for having a relationship with somebody. The second thing that he said, and again, that's obvious, but for a lot of people, it's hard to break out of that, which is where step number 2 comes in. Item number 2 is, he said, look for ways to be around other people. It's just that simple. Instead of placing the order for the groceries online, go to the store. Instead of working from home, even if you work remotely, set up shop in the coffee shop. It doesn't mean that you have to be more outgoing than you normally would be. It doesn't mean that an introvert has to turn into an extrovert. But it means that you are around people. It means that you are seeing activity around you. It means that you are encountering people all across the spectrum of life, different ages, different backgrounds, different income levels, different education, and so forth, right? It's just different. I think one of the things that I remember so much about my freshman year of college was that after a couple months, it dawned on me when I saw a child for the first time that I hadn't seen a baby for 2 months. Maybe for the first time in my life. I'd gone that long without seeing a baby. In some ways, isolation does the same thing. It's not that I needed to hang around babies. I didn't need to hold the baby. I just needed to be reminded that life was bigger than 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds on a college campus. And then the last thing he says is altruism. Altruism. What are ways that we can do things that benefit other people? How can I do something that is beyond caring for my own individual needs? How am I expressing concern for others around me and giving of my time, my resources, my prayers, all of the above? And he said, these steps are small things that we can do that will help course correct the path of isolation and loneliness and get us on the right path. I think it's a beautiful and telling thing that when Jesus came to humanity, his work was relational. Not that it had been done incorrectly before, but there was something different about Jesus walking among us and caring for us, sharing in our concerns and living in our life that was different than it had ever been done before. The commandments and the law and the traditions, that was great, but that came down and was offered as a proclamation. But Jesus was walking as God among us, and that relational piece was different. I think it's also fitting that one of the things that we do when Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," is we gather at a table. A table meant for coming together in fellowship, for breaking bread, for doing this as an act of community. What more wonderful visual representation of community than breaking bread and gathering around a common table together? What a gift that is. And so as we continue to be agents of change, to be those who follow as disciples in the footsteps of Jesus Christ and to emulate his actions, we focus on the relational part of what we are as Christian people. That means caring for ourselves and working against isolation and loneliness. It also means identifying those who are suffering silently among us, caring for them, reaching out in concern, inviting them to activities, to opportunities to serve, the table fellowship. And so we come and we gather around this table today as we continue and we conclude our worship service. And we do this and remember that this is good. Will you pray with me?